Hello, everybody. I'm here with Dave Green. He's graciously agreed to do a video for me for this tattoo history book project that I'm working on. Dave is someone whom I really wanted to interview. I've been watching his work for quite a while. I'm very enthusiastic to dig into this video and learn a little bit about his process and his personal history. So thanks for watching. Dave, welcome. Thank you again for coming on today.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate you having me on. Feel pretty honored to be interviewed for the book and for the video series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people have been really enjoying the videos, and I'm trying to have enough hold back so that when people read the book, they're not going to get it all in these videos.
That'll be good too, right? Like some surprises in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning. When you first initially got interested in tattooing, how did that come about?
I think I was really interested in tattooing pretty young. My first introduction to it was when I was about 12 or 13. And that was doing some sort of stick and poke stuff on myself. And I didn't really know what I was doing, obviously. And then things started to come together around when I was 16, when a couple buddies had gone and gotten tattooed in Winnipeg, where I grew up. And I was 16 and they were 17, and they were going to a guy named Strider.
Okay.
Strider had been around for a long time in Winnipeg, and pretty infamous guy for sure.
I interviewed Strider.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, I interviewed him years ago.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So you know. So
I know
he was out by the airport, and we rolled out there, and he was tattooing at that sort of the back of his house there. And in the front, it was all snakes and tarantulas. Like it was sort of this typical 80s biker house, right? He's selling snakes and tarantulas, and there's music going. It's all smoky. And so I sat there all day. I didn't get tattooed, but the two guys I was with got these little tattoos. And man, I was fascinated. I was just all over it.
Next, Dave shares with us how he got into tattooing. While he was living in Toronto doing body piercing at New Tribe, he met Bill Baker. Dave and Bill became fast friends, and he started to get tattooed by Bill.
With New Tribe for a bit, and then I'd come out to Vancouver, and I knew that I wanted to move out here. So I ended up moving out here, and I kind of, at that point, I'd quit the industry. I was done with everything that I was doing. And Bill had moved out here as well, and I was right in the middle of my back piece with Bill. And he was working out at Dutchman.
Okay.
And John and Lagaya, his wife, spent a lot of time in the Philippines. And at that point, they were spending like 3 to 6 months in the Philippines. And Bill needed some help at the studio, and I needed my back done. So I was working 2 to 3 days a week with him, just doing counter stuff, shop assistant stuff. And along the way, I guess I was bugging him, he was bugging me, and he was just saying, like, you should tattoo. You can draw well enough at that point. You might want to consider it. And I think I just gave in at one point. I said, yeah, just show me, start showing me stuff.
And so what year would that have been when you were assisting Bill at Dutchman?
Sacred Heart was already open. It was probably 94, 95. That winter. I think it was 94, 95. Bill had showed me a lot of good stuff, and I was hanging around with guys like Chad Woodley, Sean Headley. I just got introduced to Steve Moore. Like these guys that were at the time and still are incredible people and incredible tattooers. So these influences were coming in, and I felt really secure about it. Felt secure about, owning the studio and running it and tattooing at the time. So we took over, and that's when the OG crew of Sacred Heart really solidified, which was Chad Woodley, Sean Headley, Michael Johnson, Steve Moore. He had come down from Whistler and started working with us pretty regular. Craig Driscoll was there. Who else was there? I think at that time that was it, but it was a really solid crew of people. And then Bill had left Dutchies, and he was working with us. So that was really at the beginning of when Icon had started. And Bill was doing all this incredible R&D. and just researching stuff and experimenting with stuff. And so we were in this sort of, I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but in this crazy little vortex where Bill was trying new things out, new types of needles, new types of pigments, new machine ideas. And we were all getting tattooed from him and from each other. So we were all trying these things out. So we were like in this, like this really burgeoning renaissance in a sense, like very isolated in this one little studio. And because at that point, like a lot of places in Canada, a lot of cities in Canada, tattooing was just starting to take off again, right? And we were sort of the young guns, and we were really busy. There was lots of people coming to get tattooed. And so we were all cutting our teeth. We were all within our first probably 5 to 10 years at most. And we were all learning from each other and really getting along. It was a really great little crew of guys. And I'll always say that so fortunate for myself to have worked with that whole crew and just what I learned, because I wouldn't be half the tattooer I am now if I hadn't had that. It's probably about 5 years from, let's say 96, 97 to about 2000, 2001. If I hadn't had that base group of support around me, and with Bill's especially, and all the stuff that happened with Icon, I wouldn't be half the tattooer that I am at this point, right?
Yeah.
Learned a lot about the industry. There was such a change in the industry going from, to simplify it a lot, like this sort of biker run scenario that we were all used to really just finding our own way and creating something new, like the custom idea, and doing less flash and more drawings and spending more time and more effort on that design and the custom design, bringing that creative side into it instead of just doing flash. So, and no disrespect to anybody doing that, right? But we were taking cues from Bill, John, Paul out in Calgary, those kind of guys, right? So Dave Shore, all those guys, right? And then there were so many other great guys in Vancouver at the time. Like Trent Pear was tattooing down at Granville Street. You know, there was really a great scene out here that seemed isolated from the rest of Canada, but we had all these influences because of, up until, well, probably between 97 and 2004, a lot of us are traveling out to Montreal and working with Pierre and Dave C out at Tattoo Mania, and then getting introduced to Simon and all that crew out there, Safwan and all those guys. And they were just doing this incredible work down there. And then we had, a lot of connection to San Francisco, Seattle, all that tattooing that was going up on the West Coast. There was just this, it felt like a microcosm, but it was really all these tendrils that went out, and there were so many great people influencing us and coming to work with us. And, just really, really fortunate. I think that we all would say that we're really fortunate to be in that little solid crew, Sacred Heart, between 97 and 2001, right?
Yeah. And when I look at, Sacred Heart, to me, it feels similar to the old Tatarama, Way Cool, the Dutchman, Paul Jeffries, their shops where they had just a revolving door of incredible talent coming through there. There's lots of shops where, it's one person or maybe a few extras, but you don't have a volume of people coming through. And Sacred Heart seemed like it had that. It was just its own little microcosm, using your words, of tattooing going on just in that studio alone.
Yeah, I agree. I have to agree with you, because during that time when tattooing was starting to find a new footing, there was shops like John's shop down at Dutchy, right? He had Rob Hope and all those guys coming through there, Ryan Halter. And then out in Tatarama, starting in 81 with Bill, and then the guys he trained, like Shane Faulkner, Dave Wildenbohr, Scott McEwen, all those guys, like that's really like, I see that shop where Tatarama started around, and I guess it wasn't 81, I'm sorry. That's when Bill started tattooing. But when Tatarama started, that was this genus, and the tendrils started to go out. And Bill's influence on so many tattooers in Canada And then the trickle down from that, even probably people that don't even know who Bill is. Right? Bill influenced Pierre, and then Tatouage Artistique in Montreal with Keith and all that. Like there was so much influence that came out of Tattoo-rama. And then John and Dave Shore out here. And John was really a teacher, right? He, even to this day, I think he really enjoys the teaching part of tattooing. Everybody that's always been on his crew. And I think that's what we had within Sacred Heart during that time was we had Bill, who was this incredible mentor, but then we had each other as well. And we were going back and forth and experimenting. And then when you have a natural guy like Steve Moore, and then you have Bill Baker with you, you're getting incredible influences and incredible suggestions and critiques and all that. Right. So I think that we all benefit from that. And we each brought something else to the table. Myself, I think I brought more of just like running the shop and creating that studio and creating that space. And then I was influenced creatively from all these other people. Again, like Sean Headley, Michael Johnson, Chad Woodley, especially Chad. Chad influenced me quite a bit with his Japanese work and his drawing style. He still rings in my head every once in a while when I'm drawing a drawing. I'm like, oh yeah, I got it. I can't do it like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So, right. So one thing that I've noticed traveling around is Canada has such a great amount of talent, but also a great amount of good humans within tattooing that really care about tattooing and like to treat people well, which I really appreciate quite a bit. So.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it on the head there. And doing this, it's going to be a set of books that I'm working on. It's more than time to put together all this amazing talent and humble people. And like I just can't wait to hold these things in my hands because there is so much talent here and so many unsung heroes in tattooing. So.
Right. Yeah. And influential people, right. In a lot of ways. Canadian tattoo scene from early days, right? Doc Forbes, Curly Allen, Sailor Jerry, Dave Long, all those influences, and even some of the small guys like Strider, like the things that Strider did, right? Paul Jeffries, all those influences have created a really great style, a really great tattoo scene and community and industry within Canada.
So you didn't have like a standard apprenticeship. It was more like there was like a group of people that you were learning under and.
Sure. Yeah. In a big way. And like that first few months after, so it was a particular day. Like Bill and I had a lot of fun at Dutchman's. It was a lot of fun that few months that I helped him out there. And that day that, I wasn't doing drawings for him, don't get me wrong, but I was helping him. I was doing tracings and things like that, right? And helping him out. And that day when he said, you should just fucking tattoo. Like it was almost like he was through with bugging me about it. And I was through with him bugging me about it. And I said, sure. And that night I went and grabbed oranges and he showed me my first things. And I had done a couple tattoos already. A couple of the old bikers that I worked with in Winnipeg. I did a tattoo on Dave Wildenbohr in Toronto. So I'd been around it and I'd been around it for a long time. And at that point I was pretty covered. Like I think I had 2 sleeves at that point. My back was in progress. So I kind of knew what I was doing. And then over the next few months, even though I wasn't working with Bill at John's, we were quite close and he would tattoo me at my place when I was with Greta. And then he was around Sacred Heart. So this influence was always there. A very loose apprenticeship. But then when we were all together, it was just me. Like, I know for my part, I was always watching them. I was always watching everybody. We were like going back and forth, critiquing each other and just being really conscious about what everybody was doing in the studio. And we were all cutting our teeth and paying our dues, or however you want to say it. But to have Bill there as a mentor and to sort of guide us a little bit was really, really great. Yeah.
So back in 2007 or 1997, when you purchased the shop, what's going through your mind? Like that's like a a monumental thing, right?
We had the money, and I don't want to take anything away from Glenn. Adam ran the studio for a couple of years. And at that point, he went through hell to open that studio. You've talked to Adam. He probably told you a lot of the stuff that happened during that time. And when he was done with it and he took off, I think he went to New Orleans at that point. But anyway, he had sold it to Glenn, and Glenn really didn't know what he was doing. And he had a bunch of he had us there, a bunch of crazy young tattooers. It wasn't really great, right? And so when it looked like the bunch of us were talking, we should just leave and open our own studio. This is going south. We didn't have supplies. There wasn't the basic things that were being taken care of from an owner. And I remember asking Bill, I don't know what we should do. And he said, well, you got the money. Why don't you just offer Glenn some money for it? So it was in November, December. It was a rainy November evening. I went to Glenn's house with Greta, and I had this box full of cash. And we sat in his garage, freezing cold. It was raining in the garage. And I was just listen, you're either going to lose the studio or you're going to take this cash and we'll go to the lawyers tomorrow and do it. And I remember leaving the money with him, and I was like, this is so crazy. Leaving that amount of money with somebody with no receipt, no nothing.
That's totally gangster too, to show up with a box full of cash.
I knew it was the only way that was going to happen. And, it was good because he knew what was going on, and he was going through his own things at the time. And so, we took over, and I think almost immediately we did a renovation at the shop. We really zeroed in on what we wanted to do. And we wanted to create a really, I guess, in modern language, a really safe space, an inclusive space. We had so much energy, and we're so gung-ho and really close. At that point, we're all still friends. I don't want to disqualify any of that. But at that time, we were this unit, this really tight unit. And for the first few months, I might be correcting myself, but Steve was working up with Aaron Kane in Whistler, and he was coming down on the weekends and working with us. And then eventually, pretty soon, he ended up working with us full time. So it was just these bunch of young guns doing tattooing like crazy. And we were doing, it was still a lot of flash back then. I remember there was days where 3 or 4 of us would be doing the same Leo Zulueta tribal armband, and we'd be keeping our clients away from each other so they wouldn't see it, right? But I was learning, for my own personal place in that, I was running the studio. I was super excited, at that point, but I was also learning all this stuff, and I was cutting my teeth on tribal and Celtic work. And, Bill's idea was you had to learn it all. At this point in a tattoo career, you can build a career and make a livelihood out of one style, out of doing that one thing. But in the 90s and even into the 2000s, you really needed to do everything. You needed to be able to do portraits. You needed to be able to do black and gray, color, new school, old school, tribal, Celtic, all that stuff. And we were all just hammering that stuff out and really learning. And I think we all found our place then.
Your large format work, for me, it invokes a lot of a feeling about your work. And, when I look at that, even the pirate piece, I'll use that as an example. When I look at that pirate, I'm thinking what is this pirate's lineage? What kind of battles has he been in? What's his story? But your work, sort of creates when I look at the large format, there's a mythology that seems to be imbued into the work. But then
I appreciate you noticing that.
When I back up, it's just oh yeah, I'm just looking at a really super cool tattoo that's been very well executed. So
appreciate that.
I really wanted to dig into your impetus behind these big projects that you're doing. What's your process? And
well, like a lot of us, the first thing is to get nail down the ideas that are coming from the client. What does the client want to see? What's the narrative that they're talking about? And that's the most important thing to me. So it means a lot to me that you notice that about my work, that there's a mythology there. Because the narrative or the poem, the poetics within a piece, especially large format, be it a sleeve, a back, any of that, is really important. And that is always the start for me. I find it difficult to do a drawing or to do a project, work on a project, when it doesn't have a story. Like, where did that come from? And there's two things I think influence that directly. Is one, Bill always talking, and I'm going to talk about Bill's water again. He said, water always has to come from somewhere in a tattoo. It always has to have a place to come from. And the other thing is, because of Bill's influence and the influence from Chad Woodley and Sean Headley, and how we came up into into tattooing, studying Japanese work and Japanese printmaking, that has legend and mythology to it. It has a story to it. And I think I've been more influenced by that than I tend to admit most of the time, or notice. I shouldn't say admit, but notice it. With that pirate piece, it was a really simple idea and concept from the client. He wanted Blackbeard, and that was it. He just said, I just want Blackbeard, one big image on the back. And so going into that, I knew that there was more to that story, right? And I didn't want it just to be this portrait of Blackbeard, put a banner over it and say Blackbeard pirate, right? So you put these little elements into it and get into the details of it. The narrative is really important to me, but so is the flow and how things move, and the sight lines that are in a piece, especially on a back piece, how that thing looks, and moving through that piece. I'm quite proud of that piece because there's some movements in there that go from the guns up to the hat and all these little nuances that I don't even know if the photographs could catch, but you see it in the back when he's in movement, the little skulls that are all around it, these little wicks and what's going on in his beard. All that stuff is very important. I always start with the story, even if it's as simple as I'd done an angel demon sleeve recently, which we've all done 1,000 of. But there's always a different story there. There's always a different, what moment in this story is it? And I try to take that and put that into there. And I think that makes more unique pieces. If you go back into Japanese work or even American tattooing, there is a myth and a legend there, even with that little anchor or that swallow or that ship that says homeward bound. There's a myth and a story of why that's there. And then when you're getting into more the custom work, like what we're doing now, the illustrative work, there's a story there that can be told more so than just being a pirate on a back. And I think if you can imbue that in there, you're going to get that feeling out of it a bit more, right? So that energy out of it, right? So.
Because I really had to stop and look and take in everything that was going on in that back piece. And the longer I looked at it, like you say, there's tricks in there that really pull your eye, and you know how to draw. That's more than obvious. But there was just something really special about that. And again, it started invoking this emotion in me, and I'm just like, wow, like I want to know more about this piece. I want to know the story. What is the mythology behind this? And it just felt like, and when I looked at some of your other work as well, I was having that same sense of there's a lot more than just an idea involved here. It just felt there was something deeper going on, and hearing about it, I really appreciate hearing your process.
I put a lot of little eggs in there that you wouldn't see initially, but I think that subconsciously our brain picks them up and it becomes a little bit more interesting. And that kind of stuff, I would say, if I was influenced by anybody for that would be from working with Steve Moore. working with Steve Moore, and just seeing like how he has all these little elements that he puts in that you don't notice right away. And I really appreciate that. And I know that he's again working with us. He's been working with us probably since 2021 again, I think. But always being influenced by his work and how he like the elements that he puts in. And for me, that when I started to recognize that in his work, I started recognizing my own work, and then really starting to bring out those little poems and those little narratives from all that stuff.
I hope everybody enjoyed watching this interview today. This was only about 25 minutes of a 2-hour conversation. If you would like to hear more, I guess you'll have to wait till the tattoo history book comes out. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day. Thanks again for watching.